At least I have hair.
There we go.
Dude,
Okay.
if I let it go,
I know you would. You'd be.
I rip.
Yeah. So
Okay.
which of these do you think is like the best one, or most interesting?
Okay, so I have no interest in the currency one.
Yep, I know those.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the about yous I like.
Mhm.
I like the friends one, and the thought questions I like as well. I think we could go that route. I just, like I said, some of those I might have to censor.
Yeah, that's
what I would say.
totally fine.
Okay,
All I want is like times to have an entertaining conversation, and as you move, well, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna let this guy talk, and then I'm just gonna correct him.
Sounds good.
I'll correct you on the government ones.
Yeah, dude, I'm in deep here because there's a lot of government, constitution, history. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, you're plenty.
Speak
Yeah.
clearly, and we
Yeah.
just remove what needs to be
Perfect.
removed.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
3, 2,
Do we
1.
just look there?
Hey, where we want.
Okay.
How many of these have you done already?
Total 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want the door open?
Yeah, you could just a little bit. Sound and whatnot. And I did a 2.5 hour one with Ethan with kind of similar questions.
Coleman?
No.
Raquel.
Raquel, yeah. There you go.
No, I just wanted to make sure I had my phone.
I'm on page 3 of our SOP for the middle school.
I yelled at Costello the other day because she sent a copy to me. That's not my business.
I initiated this one. Anyway,
I got it.
Right.
Nice again. Okay, welcome to Works of Man. Now, what is your opinion on the First Amendment?
First Amendment is kind of the cornerstone of our liberties, the 5 freedoms, but they're often misunderstood. Like a lot of things in our Bill of Rights, people like to cherry pick and only focus on certain aspects of it. For example, the section on freedom of religion contains 2 clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, and people like to focus on the clause that most conveniently fits their views on the First Amendment, that aspect of it. And so I guess the Bill of Rights as a whole, I would hope that Americans would be more thorough in their understanding of it and understand not just what is convenient that fits their points of view.
So how would this be dealt? How would you encourage Americans to learn more about the Bill of Rights?
Well, that's a really good question. Our society doesn't provide a lot of opportunities outside of education to do that. You know, as Hemingway said, we in a free press society, we need to develop good crime detectors. And so, democracy.
I don't think that's the word he used.
Oh, he did say.
I could.
I think it was a B. Yeah, no, I think,
BS detectors?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why that phrase is used now. It's actually commonly used, BS. Democracy demands effort upon the citizens. And so be objective, consume multiple sources. Don't just go into your echo chambers, you know. Seek out responsible, respected sources, you know, not just opinion-based sources. You know, that's, again, I could elaborate and go on and on, but generally speaking, get out of your echo chamber, learn about opposing viewpoints, consider them, but also dig in and understand, read the Constitution. A lot of people, I'm of the belief that a lot of Americans sure like to cite the Constitution, and most of them don't know what's actually in the Constitution.
If I can follow up with that, one of the other questions, I think,
Yeah.
is, you know, what's the greatest problem our society is facing? I think there are 2. I think one is our kind of national lack of self-awareness, but the second one is our refusal to go outside of our echo chambers, our refusal to look at multiple sources, to actually fact check ourselves, because it is getting more and more polarized rather than less. And said this to you in private conversations, I'm pretty sure this is as divided as our country has ever been during my lifetime. And all signs are pointing to we're not anywhere close to kind of turning that direction, and that is distressing to me.
The strength of our democracy is the weakness of our democracy. And that is, these freedoms, if not exercised with responsibility, will undermine the very freedoms that we're claiming.
In your mind, what do you think led to this polarization, or this increased amount?
Well, it's funny because as I read, or as I'm perusing this or that, I come across something from 1970 or something from 1960 that, is attacking journalism. And we've seen a lot of journalism kind of come under attack over the last decade, it felt like it was something new until further research. I kind of look back and see, oh, well, here it was 50 years ago, here it was 70 years ago, here it was 100 years ago. So I think the themes don't necessarily change, but I do think that from my limited experience over my lifetime, that it becomes more or less in use, if that makes sense. And I do think that it has become kind of vogue to criticize anything that doesn't agree with your point of view. And it's this idea that, and you've heard that often used phrase from all kinds of different political sides, my facts don't care about your emotions. And I've seen people use that phrase cherry picking. But I think we have to get back to that. I think we have to be, going back to, the First Amendment and free speech, and I just said this in my class last week, I think that's my number one belief overall, is that idea of free speech. But we also have to use it with a discerning mouth. Yeah, I can say just about, not necessarily as an employee, but in my own life, I can say just about anything I want to. It doesn't mean I should. And I think that's a lesson we have to relearn.
And I would add that, to answer your question, that my 28 years, what I've seen change is social media, the rise of social media. Not only that, but also cable news, because cable news isn't actually news. Registered entertainment stations, libel laws don't apply. We've lost a collective sense of integrity in information, but at the same time, it's the greatest tool our democracy has ever seen. It's most powerful, social media. It can be used so brilliantly, but instead, now that everyone has a bullhorn and everyone is a journalist, it's noise and nobody's listening to anyone else, and there's no collective sense of what is, quote, right and wrong. Again, that's subjective.
Yeah.
But, and it's so easy. I always tell my students, it's a lot easier to throw mud in the water than it is to clean up the pond. And that's all you need to do. Just make sure that they don't win, because if they lose, you win. And so nothing, we can't come to any consensus on what we want to be as a people.
Here's an interesting idea. I think that the journalism used to have more prestige in it, correct?
Yes.
I think that having the prestige being lost and that kind of like sense of status almost being gone has led these journalists to have less standards, per se. They have less weight upon their shoulders.
What's a journalist?
So my daughter is a working journalist, and the perception is, as I said earlier, if the journalism isn't supporting my view, then the journalists are scammers or they're got some agenda. I will concede that the state of the journalistic world, to my limited knowledge, is certainly money driven, and bringing in social media, I have watched my daughter working there, and it's about clicks, and it's about how much traffic you are generating, and that is driving serious journalism, news sources, but there is a difference. And again, there are laws for it, and there's a difference between media and news. There's a difference between media and journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest problem is people conflate all of them, but combine them all together, and they can treat real journalism as if it's social media, and they are two very different things. And it's not a hard concept. But if you want to stick to, what it is you feel, it's pretty hard to separate real journalism and social media. Or cable entertainment channels that are treated as journalism or news sites when they are not. It's not, again, I don't wanna bring it down to a very simplistic level, but the answer is really simplistic. Do your research.
Yes.
But seeing that get put into action over a broad spectrum of society is proving to be near impossible.
I think part of the reason why there's such poor research done by our citizens is because of a lack of knowledge of statistics. Like study using it to read them and mathematics, so we can see how that is gathered. Is it correct? Is it done well?
Yeah, so, and again, I do think, but if you are not looking at a newspaper or a news channel, and I'm not talking CNN or Fox, I'm talking an actual news channel, you have to understand right off the bat that there's a good likelihood that what you're getting is getting presented in a skewed way, a manipulated way. It's with a direction. It is, with loaded headlines or, manipulative choices about what to include in an article and what not to include in an article. But there are libel laws, and there are sources where, whether it's, what research data is being used by which journalism company or whatever, as you said at the beginning, don't rely on one. Go look at 5, go look at 8 actual journalism sites and actual news sites and start to see, because you can't really miscarry actual stories through those news sources like you can through social media.
And to follow up on the question, add on to your question about this, even statistics today are being easily skewed because, for example, I do a unit in AP Gov on public opinion, and you'll get this in stats and so forth. What gets reported is a characterization of a poll or a study. They don't tell you what was the sample size, what were the questions, what were the choices, how many choices were there. They'll give you 76% of Americans feel this way. Okay, I need to know a little bit more about the polls themselves are cherry-picked by the very people who are trying to generate income from presenting the news in a way that will be, there is a real motivation in our capitalist media society on entertainment value, or even actually to create conflict. Mm-hmm. More conflict, the more people watch.
Yeah.
And so, who do we blame? Do we blame the news or do we blame the consumers? The answer is yes. You blame both.
Yeah.
Because they're giving us what sells, and people are not being responsible consumers of news. And nobody's watching NPR or because it's not flashy. It's nobody's watching the
ABC News.
ABC News is responsible that are subject to libel.
Yeah.
And they have to. They can't present it. I call it newsatorial. You turn on CNN, Fox, MSNBC. You're not getting news. You're getting editorialization as they're presenting the news, and because that's what sells, and because that's what people are watching. That, I think, is consistent with what you were saying and what your daughter's running and what Aaron. Aaron introduced me to a show, Aaron Sorkin's series, The Newsroom. You ever seen The Newsroom?
No.
They took this on about a decade ago, and it's fantastic. I would highly recommend you watch this. That was kind of when we were reaching,
critical
mass on this subject.
Yes.
It was about a decade ago, and now we've gone over the edge to where what is journalism? And it shows up in, like, why have we gone to annotated bibliographies? Because you now need to, we're accepting so many more sources, you need to defend your use of that source now. And because, you're citing bloggers, you're citing this, you wouldn't be able to before, decade and a half ago. But now, what is journalism? What is news? So defend. The onus is on you now, the person writing the article, to say this is a credible source and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not universally accepted in our society.
Could one view social media as kind of like a mini industrial revolution, and how after an industrial revolution, so that society is very chaotic, one could argue kind of helped cause WW1 and lots of chaos in societies. Would this be something similar? Technology creating an uproar in society and to bubble out and go back down to some measure of stability.
Very astute.
I'm going to leave the history part to you. I'm just going to really quickly jump into the social part. We're already seeing the negative effects of social media. We've been seeing it already, whether it's harassment or online bullying or just in that sense. We talk over and over again about bullying and harassment in public education, and I think for the most part we try to do a credible and continual job of teaching and educating students. But then they go home, and it's not just students, it's people my age, and social media, and I know this isn't exactly your question, but that I don't see any controlling of that. And I don't see how a school can do it, and I don't see how a society can stop that until we become kinder and gentler people. And I know that's not the actual aspect of the question, but there's your negative from technology, the rise of technology. That's the one that I think is very pertinent to this particular setting.
And I think that's what's unique about this new media. I think you're absolutely right to draw comparisons. This happened with newspapers. It happened with radio. It happened with TV. It came along, and good and bad of it all. Media has often been referred to as the watchdog of democracy. A democracy needs that is part of our system. It's not a formal part, but we the people, this provides us in a representative democratic system a voice. It's a portal. It presents information. And it also represents our opinions. That said, you've seen some great things happen with modern social media. If you want to look at the Arab Spring, you want to look at the backlash, and you look what's happening right now. The Ukrainians are using media to fight Russian propaganda. Now it's going the other way as well. So I think that we will, hopefully, if history repeats itself, well, not repeats, but mirrored rhymes, you'll see us eventually figure out collectively, hopefully, how to use this, how to adapt to it. Will we regulate it to any extent? Well, we've had to some extent with libel laws. What will libel laws look like? Not censor per se, but at least hold people accountable. With your free speech comes that responsibility. And you should be held accountable if you are using this platform to incite danger in our society. That's where we've drawn the line. Every liberty can and is reasonably limited when we reach that point. Our whole system is a constant balance between individual liberties and the good of the whole, the public. And it should be a contentious discussion. We should always drop a flag when we're trying to censor or so forth. But it spills into COVID things and mandates and so forth. We can look back and say, well, we went too far. Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't. And those are mechanisms that are built into our Constitution, and they built that conflict in there. And so I think it's different. It's more pervasive. It's reaching into our personal relationships more than any media ever has, and that is quite alarming. But in terms of information, it's the same. In terms of how we're getting our news, we have to decide how we want to make it, hold them accountable for responsibility. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how about free speech in the school? So what trends do you notice along the speech in general in your time as a teacher?
You wanna go first?
Sure, I don't have I mean, I'll ramble into kind of my response. If I go back to the beginning, and I think of over the course of my career, regarding speech specifically, certainly the classroom environment has become much more casual by teachers, by students, together. I think that has been a positive. I think our generation, I can't think of, I mean, I had no idea what grade I was ever earning because I never saw my grades.
Mm-hmm.
I never spoke to a teacher unless the teacher forced me to. There was respect, but there was certainly, it was a much more distant process than what I think we have today. And I think, I mean, the only reason I do this job is because of the students in the classroom. And I think we're really lucky because at least for that hour a day, 30 kids in my classroom are great human beings. And then I pretend like they step out my door and they disappear for 23 hours until they come back into my classroom, and we're all great human beings together. And I think that's a positive change. So that's, yeah.
Are you talking in and out of the classroom?
Sure.
Okay, so we were in high school when Hazelwood versus Colemeyer was happening. You know, you're familiar with that case. And
Sure, yeah.
free speech and journalism. We were in the wake of Tinker versus Des Moines and youth rights. You know, youth rights were in schools really weren't protected until the 70s and 80s, and really even then, you saw in earnest the 1990s is when this started. That said, how has it affected, you know, teaching social studies and the humanities in general? We have more opinion-based, hopefully fact-based discussions in our classroom more than other subjects. And so how has it impacted our classroom? I would agree that absolutely it's become more open, more engaging. Now, I taught in Chehalis, a more conservative community. You taught in Alma.
Slightly.
More conservative community, and absolutely community standards do affect, you know, the classroom. It's part of federalism. That said, I saw our kids, one thing that's alarmed me recently is that my students lately have felt more gun shy in terms of sharing opinions on issues in class. And when I press them on it, they say, well, I'm not gonna get attacked in class, it's gonna happen outside of class, it's gonna happen on social media, so I'm not gonna go there. So it has really kind of stifled the benefits of having these difficult, challenging discussions in class when no one wants to talk anymore, because they're afraid that they're going to be subtweeted, if that's even a thing anymore, but you know what I'm getting at.
I never use any social media.
Yeah, and so they're gonna get attacked, not necessarily by name, but everybody knows who it is when they, you know, something goes out on social media. And so, now in terms of kids, I've also seen this generation. I know one of your questions that I'm getting ahead of you here is, what do you think about this generation? And I'm excited for, you guys aren't millennials, you're whatever we're gonna call this last generation. And I see that you guys are more aware. And I liken you to the lost generation of the 20s. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with the lost generation. They were, in the wake of World War I, they were upset, they became the flaming youth, they rebelled. And they weren't gonna just criticize, they were gonna do something about it. And I feel like that's what you guys are. The millennials were upset, but I don't see them, I see them criticizing more than acting. I think that you guys are more like your Greta Thunbergs of the world, where you're gonna get out and do something, at least I hope. So, I don't know if that was a ramble. So student speech is something both of us are known for supporting. You know, within reason and responsibility.
So how about the community standards? How are they different in Chehalis versus here?
Well, specifically Chehalis, it was, whenever a contentious subject was even brought up in my class, I'd get a phone call. A parent would call, the administrators would call, I hear you talking about, somebody brought up prostitution in your classroom. Okay, we're talking about the legal aspects of it. Back in the 90s, we would have class discussions about legalizing marijuana or same-sex marriage. And I had an assistant principal ask me, well, these are inappropriate discussions for class. It's never gonna happen in America. Well, look at us now. So, and here in Olympia, very different. I don't have those concerns. As long as we are responsible in making sure that these discussions are based off of laws and the Constitution and supported arguments rather than opinions, and that we provide a safe place for people to share their opposing viewpoints as well. And I feel that we both have a reputation of doing that. Then that's really what we should be doing, because that's American democracy. We have opposing viewpoints. We're going to disagree on most things, and hopefully we can find some compromise.
And I would say, I can go back to that transition period. The last 2 years I taught at my previous school, and followed by the first 2 years I taught here. The size of the school was certainly much different, but even now, years and years from that time, I think back and what I loved about my students back at the old school is I never had to question what they were thinking, because they told me. And I like that. I like that kind of down-to-earth, blunt speak. And when I think back to what I found so refreshing when I first started teaching here, and I find it to this day at Olympia, is, man, the students are really nice and kind to me, even when I'm pretty sure some of them don't want to be.
Knife behind the back kind of thing?
Right, well, not, yeah, just the idea that, yeah, just that it's kind of the two extremes. And I love that about both places, because there's something to be said for both of those approaches. And that was sure there were, kind of wide-ranging political differences between Elma and Olympia, but I always think of it in terms of, and I don't know if I should say this or not, yes, parents are our clients, but the parents aren't my clients in the classroom, the students are. And so when I think of the differences community-wise, I always think of it in terms of what are the students who are in my classroom in front of me. The outside community, I learned a long time ago, you can't please everybody, you can't please most people, and if you set out to try to do that, you're gonna be doing a worse job than if you just do what you know is right.
Let's take the student walkouts as an example. You had the one week or two ago over, in response to the leak from the Supreme Court on abortion. And there were people criticizing those students, but,
For walking out?
For walking out. But, we flash back to when we had students on both sides of the gun rights issue. There were some conservative students who had did their own walkout. And regardless of the student's position, if they want to engage in civil disobedience, I support that, as long as they understand what civil disobedience is. And in my class, they do.
And they're okay with the consequences.
And that's what civil disobedience is.
Yeah.
And so it's, to me, it's just encouraging, as long as it's an informed, decision. But then again, who am I to say, what's going to motivate them? That's democracy, right? And so I'm all for student speech as long as it's, within the expectations in terms of it doesn't cross the line of obscenity, and again, that's a subjective word. The Miller test is what's obscene in one community isn't obscene in another community. So, yeah, absolutely. I encourage informed opinions, whether I agree with them or not. That's not my job.
How about taboos? How have they changed over time?
Elaborate on this.
For like, since you started teaching, how have the taboos changed? And what topics can you not talk about here, and what can you not talk about at, say, Chehalis?
So,
Go ahead.
so, I do think, I do think we're living in a very interesting time, and I don't wanna make this a political thing, but I'm gonna make this an educational thing. Public education has been under attack for decades. And, depending on where you are in the country, it's under attack for various different reasons. I think, we're seeing, a push, to, promote alternative forms of education. Charters, vouchers, private schools. And the way that some people in this country are doing that is by trying to tear down public education. So, and you see, you see the book burning in Tennessee from 4 or 5 months ago. You see this continual discussion on CRT in public education, and how people are using a buzzword phrase like CRT to obscure the fact that we just teach history, and this is your area, but it comes up in my classroom as well. This idea that
It's your subject too, for sure.
that it's, here we are, public educators, and we're indoctrinating students. I haven't seen it, and it seems silly to me. And maybe somebody would say that I'm guilty of doing it, but I try really hard not to. Going back to what you said, you and I don't have to agree, but just show me that you've put some thought into this, rather than just, whatever I feel like, and then that's of equal value to somebody's opinion who has researched the subject and, kept some information, thrown others out. Same with sources, they're not equal. And just because and again, coming back to what I said earlier, just because it feels right to you, doesn't mean it's on the same footing as whatever the source may be, reliable research. And again, research and data and statistics get manipulated all the time as well. So it's a complex task to keep yourself informed with actual verifiable sources. So when we talk about taboos in the classroom, if you're in Texas, it's you're probably not going to see a lot of community supported discussions on abortion. And if you are here or other places, obviously, that you get people who are talking about the liberal indoctrination of towards communism or socialism is the big one. And so I don't know, from back when I was your age and in a classroom, the whole idea of indoctrination, or what we can or can't talk about, if it ever was an issue, I never paid attention to it and didn't really know.
I would say that if I hear the word taboo, I'm gonna question that community. To me, it's ethics. If you say something's taboo, that's implying that we don't want you to say this, rather than, I'm grateful to teach in a community where I can have a discussion about just about anything in my classroom, as long as it's done from an educated perspective, So I have students proposing my end of the year civic action projects, the legalization of prostitution. I have students proposing the decriminalization of all drugs. I have students talking about, on the other side, there's some students proposing that gay people shouldn't be able to adopt. We can have those discussions, and everyone benefits as long as your objective is to come in and educate yourself about it, and that you hold the students accountable to presenting informed opinions, not just opinions, but informed. Okay, all right. And it's my job to make sure that indeed, I'm not going to challenge a kid because I don't like their opinion. That's not my job. But I am going to hold them accountable to support their opinion. And if it's unsupported, it's my job to push them and say, all right, now back this up. Please support this with some credible, and again, people say, well, that's subjective. I don't think it is subjective. I think you can absolutely, discern whether something is credible or not credible.
And that is slightly off topic, but related to what you were saying, I take satire over the last few years, what is taboo or what has changed. I've been teaching satire since the mid-2000s. It's a lot harder to teach satire and parody today than it was 15 years ago.
Sensitivities?
Because we could call it sensitivities, we can call it, kind of enlightened process, just the concept of satire being used as a weapon for the weak to attack the strong, which is not how I started teaching that class years and years ago. It was the wild, wild west. But really what I'm talking about today is real life and satire have closed the gap.
Yeah.
That what
That's a good way
used
to
to
look
be
at it.
considered incredibly exaggerated, at this point in time, I could spend a week or 2 weeks simply bringing in examples of satire and examples of real actual news and quizzing my students. Is it live or is it Memorex? Which one? And 15 years ago, that would have been easy.
Yeah.
Now, I actually do occasionally bring in some piece of news that has all the earmarkings of what we would call satire and parody, but is actually true.
Can you give an example?
Yeah.
Crossfire?
No, I think, what?
Crossfire?
Crossfire, yeah, but that one.
That was a while ago.
That was a while ago. No, I think there was an article, and this is back about 7 or 8 years ago, when the whole school testing craze was just taking off and just really hammering it down. And there was an article that was about 3 and 4 year olds getting their own personal computers in preschool. And I started reading it thinking, oh, this is funny. And then I learned that it was real. It's such a push that we had gone from high school students getting their own Chromebooks to, all right, well, we gotta make 3 and 4 year olds computer savvy. And when I realized, like 3/4 of the way through the article that it wasn't a parody, I just got sad and despondent.
Yeah. What was the argument for that?
Well, the argument, which continues to happen, is we have to prepare everybody for the real world, and we have to make sure that they have their plan. And we see examples, and I'm on the minority here, and I want to be careful how I say this. You're 14. You
Yep.
better know what you're doing when you're 25, but
Yep.
you need to know it now. No, you don't. And I'm telling you, you don't need to know what you're going to be doing when you're 25, when you're,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you're 14.
15, yeah.
15, sorry. But what it was, in my opinion, through my research, it was just one of many companies trying to get their foot in the door so that they can make money. It is fascinating, and this is where I learned more. I learned more about how the world works when I dove deeply into all the educational reform policies, and I saw just how vast the number of companies and groups out there who are either trying to or are successfully making a financial killing off of public education.
And this is an example of where us being veteran teachers and being well educated makes it even more challenging to straddle that line between opinion and and so forth, because this feels like opinion. Okay, corporate America is affecting education. Well, it's an informed opinion because we see it.
And spent my time.
And look what's happening now. I mean, it's pretty much every preschoolers are going to be getting computers. We were supposed to have a book adoption for social studies, and I think one of the reasons it was put on hold this year is this move towards open source. Open source is internet-based sources rather than textbooks. And that's being pushed down all the way, before you know it, we won't have textbooks. And so I think that's just an
It's gonna make the
example.
textbook companies very sad.
Yeah, and well,
Yeah,
textbook
that's
companies
right.
are going in that direction.
Right, they're the ones that'll be right.
But, so, you do see that, and so that's where, that's a significant, and I think we're getting off the question a little bit here, so. What do you got
So
for us?
how about society in 5 years' time? Where do you think it'll be?
Oh, wow.
Is it speculation?
Given these last 2 years, it's even harder to predict that and where we're gonna go. I'll say as a government teacher, in my 28 years, this is, I sensed something coming, we were going to, if you look historically, this is a long period of relative stability in human history. Humans, we are prone to breaking down what we build up. You gave a good example of World War I. That was after a 40-year period of relative stability in Europe and so forth. And we've had a long period here, and we see the ambitions of people who are power hungry and so forth. And then when that comes to a head with, you add these different components like social media and a very fragile house of cards democracy and all the braces being pulled out of it, I do worry. I worry now more about our democracy than I have in any time in my life. Now, what does that look like? Is this Supreme Court gonna lead us down towards more of a 10th Amendment push where the power goes back to the states? It feels like that's what they wanna do. But do they wanna do that on every issue, or are they cherry picking the issues? And, there's been talk of our democracy collapsing and maybe a splintering. But could that even happen, or would people's ambitions lead us to war, where people, if again, I'm getting way down the road here, but who knows what we're gonna look like in 5 years? I do feel as though a lot of these issues will work out through. We have a way of seeing things in hindsight and learning from them, but it's an unsettling, uncertain time. And I worry mostly for you guys. I feel like Gen Xers, we are probably the most privileged generation in the history of humans.
Yeah, I can see it, yeah.
Because the generations that came before us had sacrificed world wars, Vietnam, Korea. Generations that came out after us can't afford anything. My college tuition, my first year was $450 a semester. When I graduated, it was $600 a semester. My first house cost me $130,000. And, how can people, young millennials and Gen Zers, that's what you are, right? I worry from my own daughters who are 24 and 16. What is their future gonna be like? It's a really, I'm glad you asked the question, and I don't think either one of us have a real answer.
How about the?
Well, I have a quick answer. 5 years from now, I'm gonna be real close to being done. I'm gonna disappear into the vast cosmos. Nobody's gonna find me, and everybody else is on their own.
Yeah,
So.
I can agree with that. How about the historical trends? Like, what are the main historical trends across history, in your mind?
Well, one of them was, in America, the democratization of America, and now I think for the first time that I can remember, we're reversing some of that. I don't want to get too political here, but we're starting to see now liberties taken away by the courts rather than extended by the courts. And if you look at the trend of our history, that's not been the case. It's been more democracy. Only 10, 12% of the population could vote when we became a nation.
Yeah.
We've seen through amendments, inclusion, but now we're seeing voter suppression. We're seeing efforts to limit democracy. And so the historical trends right now are alarmingly being reversed. As I forget the exact quote of Martin Luther King, but the arc of truth, justice bends towards justice. I'm not sure that that's true anymore, and I worry about that. Will our innate human inclinations of selfishness, if you go back to the enlightened thinkers and, John Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu and Madison, will they ultimately prevail, and will this great experiment fail ultimately? America's trying to do what no nation has ever done before and overcome our selfish inclinations, and I'm not sure that it's ultimately going to succeed, and that scares me.
And the only thing I have to add is, because it's not my area, but the one thing that I have learned more and more recently over the last couple of years is just how old the news really is. When I keep going back and I'm seeing the same issues, or were issues 100 years ago and 80 years ago and 60 years ago, and I really felt like what we've been going through over the last 5 or 10 years has been something really new and different, and that's not the case. It's just simply been shouted louder. But I mean, we've been arguing the same issues in this country since we started, and I never kind of really put that into a kind of a rational line of thinking. The old news is the new news.
I would agree at the core. I mean, there's more specificity of things, like, we never used to argue about marijuana or same-sex marriage because it was just suppressed.
Yeah.
But the core of individual liberties, it all comes down to power. That's just, and that's always been true of humanity. It's about power, and those who have it who do not want to relinquish it. And when they feel like it's being relinquished, there will be a backlash, and that's what we're experiencing.
And so how does power operate? Like on average?
It ignores the truth when it's convenient.
Now, how much truth can it ignore? Since
all of it.
I agree too. Well, you can ignore the truth. Like, say there's a volcano about to erupt, and it's going to erupt, destroy your entire island per se. If you ignore that, yeah, you're going to be good for a while. Eventually, reality catches up, and it's catastrophic.
I would add, it manipulates the truth, and it creates there's a saying in politics is perception. And perception drives public opinion, and public opinion drives a democracy. And public opinion is being manipulated, which goes back full circle to the onus is on us. We have to be informed consumers of the information that's being presented to us, and I don't think Americans are doing a very good job of being effectively and objectively informed.
That's an interesting question. What are the main drivers of society in your minds?
Oh, now we're going to get a little political here. Okay, so I don't think this would be disputed.
Yeah.
We are a capitalist. We are found on capitalism, and so at the core, we've always had that influence of a capitalist influence. Capitalism is partly why we've been successful. It's partly why we've been divided. There's good and bad to all of it. We have a mixed economy. We have elements of socialism. Public education is the most socialistic thing we have. But we also have a free market system that drives innovation. But when we get skewed and we get out of balance, and this goes back to something even Madison said, the key to effective governing is balance. And when we get out of, and that's just the key to life, you get out of balance, you then tilt the scale towards one group or one faction. And that's what's happening now. People understand that. And people who want power, I don't think this is controversial. That's what Vladimir Putin does. That's what, if you look at these let's just call them what they are, megalomaniacs, they manipulate information. That is the driver. How we communicate, it's all a social construct. We've constructed it all, so they can control the language, and they can control the perception. They can control people.
And I would say the first 10 spots, to answer your question, are all filled with money. And then after the first 10 spots, the next 10 spots would be filled with power. And then you'd skip about 20 or 30 empty spots and start going through other things.
I think money and power kind of very, very closely related, since money
I-
in its core is like opportunity and the potential, and power is the ability to control opportunity and the potential to have your will come about.
I agree. I agree, except I do think that it's the money first, and I do think that there are other forms of power that aren't necessarily based on money.
Mhm.
So that's why I wanna provide a little bit of a discrepancy,
Yeah.
is we can get power through various different means, most of which require money, but I would say not all of them.
Yeah.
Madison said the most common cause of factions is the unequal distribution of property. By property, he meant
Everything.
money, everything, and he was right. You know, and you see, and look at income inequality today. It's greater than it's been since
1940s or 50s.
No, it's even more than that.
Is
The
it
Gilded
1901?
Age.
Oh,
The Gilded Age.
oh, so we've been bypassed, so
We have.
we've passed another barrier.
It's the Gilded Age, and so, you know, it's
Well,
and so hence it shouldn't be surprising that we
Yeah.
see so much conflict in our society now.
if you wanna solve, or at least begin to solve, issues in education, issues in our legal system, in our criminal system, you start with addressing poverty.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I don't care what your social issue is, somewhere at the top of the list is going to be, for causes, is gonna be poverty. But it's not a very popular topic because there's no money in it. And so we pretend, and we come up with other things that are fixes.
Yeah.
Sorry, nothing else is going to fix, like I think people want, and I'll use education, because I'm quite familiar with that. Whatever statistical data, or whatever issues, whether it's a discipline issue, or it's a social media issue, or it's this or that, or anything else, I cannot think of an issue in public education that would start with anything but fixing poverty in order to improve things.
To support that, you see parallels. Poverty, crime rates, parallel.
Mhm.
Education rates, the socioeconomic status is the number one indicator of economic success. And, yeah, absolutely. And so it cuts back to money, opportunity. In America, it's all about equal opportunity, and our system is bent on equal opportunity, not equal outcome. That's what's guaranteed is, well, supposedly guaranteed is
Yeah.
equal opportunity. We have a hard time getting there. And so, I would absolutely agree with you 100% on that, and that, I see it when I analyze issues.
Back to the factors of success, I believe there are like money, IQ, and like conscientiousness, like the work ethic and like keep your word and whatnot, as the top three. I think one could argue that in an ideal society, you have like intelligence and I see a hard work ethic would only be getting closer and closer to wealth in its prediction of success, right?
Yeah, but that's the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps
Yeah.
fallacy.
Ideally,
Yeah, but it's not true. It's a nice phrase to say, but, and again, this comes back to, and I guess I'll bring in this political issue in response to that is, it's the difference between, what briefly was phrased as white guilt compared to what that evolved into, which was privilege. And it is not the same. And it doesn't mean because I happen to be an old white guy that my life hasn't been hard. What it means is my life hasn't been harder because of any other factors. And so, and I have this with a lot of my own friends in my own generation who whenever whenever the concept of privilege comes up, I always get, just hard work will pay off. It's that Puritan mentality that this country was founded on is, hey, as long as you work hard, you will succeed, and that's not true. That is not true because there are barriers, all kinds of different barriers, and it's a nice little quip to say to kind of diminish what other people are going through. but privilege is a real thing, and whether or not our society acknowledges it, and I have this argument with friends of mine, and they will not see it because they continue to fall back on, hey, I worked hard and I made it. Well, yeah, you had a lot of things you didn't have to worry about that other groups of people do. And so, anyway, it's a bit of a.
I think you understand what I was saying. I said ideally, it would eliminate everything else, basically all the factors that the individual himself has the most weight on their future.
I think he's supporting what you're saying in that he's saying that yes, ideally, that is that, but that's assuming we all start on Go. Some people start on Park Place, others start on Baltic.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, that's just the reality of it. And along the way, you're going to run into your community chests and your pitfalls, or it's a mousetrap, whatever analogy you want to use. Now, that's not to diminish those people in any way, try to put some guilt on them. It's just an acknowledgement that you have to reject that rhetoric that, well, just work hard, because for some people that there is no ladder, there is no path. Well, what can we do in a society to make it the opportunity equal? I'm not guaranteeing the outcome, but the opportunity. That's why affirmative action policies are so contentious, is that there's an effort to try to briefly, it's basically affirmative action is triage. You know, triage is used only briefly, to get to a point where you can then send them out and they can survive. That's what affirmative action is, and the courts have kind of recognized it. But it is contentious because it at least for time crosses over to trying to create some equal outcome. But ironically, the courts have affirmed that they'll only accept it for a while, and then ultimately the success of affirmative action actually leads to it then being pulled away, like race-based college admissions policies. You know, it was okay until it wasn't, because you started to see the benefits of it, and you had to back off and try to create this, free market society where you can compete. And so there are, what we really need to do is try to find ways to, we're not vilifying wealth, but rather let's eliminate the barriers that do exist for people to at least have a fair shot, a fair chance in our society, because people are deliberately putting them out there.
And again, and I could go on this subject, so I don't want to, but, when the concept of privilege comes up, a very common natural reaction is to get defensive and to personalize it and to say, exactly as I said earlier, well, my life has not been easy, and I didn't sit around and complain, and we start adding all kinds of qualities and attributes to other people that we have no idea whether or not they've even done, because we lack the ability to I think sometimes that self-awareness I mentioned earlier, recognize the differences in how our society treats different people. And I'm sorry, you can pick any group you want. You can look and see right now groups having to fight for equal rights today in 2022. And it's not like, I don't want to get, whether it's the welfare state or whatever argument against the concept of privilege doesn't wash, because it doesn't change the fact that some people's lives are easier arbitrarily than other people's.
Privilege comes in different forms. Both of us had pretty humble upbringings, or both of us came from, we struggled a bit. My dad was a pastor. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad died when I was in high school. But my privilege comes in what I look like. I'm a white middle-aged male. There's some privilege there, right? And I'm aware of that. That's gonna upset some people. Okay, I'm higher into middle age.
Because you are older than I am.
But even in our profession, let's be honest, male teachers probably have a little bit of a privilege in terms of the classroom over some of the challenges that some female teachers might have to face. I don't know if everybody agrees with that. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think in terms of discipline and so forth, that there might be a bit of an advantage there. But I'm aware of that, So yeah, I worked hard. I did pull myself up, quote, from my bootstraps, but that doesn't mean that I don't still recognize that I have some privilege that other people don't have. Would I be here if I were not white? I don't know. I honestly don't know. What would my life, what other challenges would I have had to face? I don't know. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So a retro one then. How about, well, ideology. So back to the power part. So you have money and ideology. So some people want to do it for money, power, and some are true believers per se, and they do it for the ideology. I think that has affected society and history.
I don't think I'm well versed enough to answer that question.
You are, after I speak, I think you're gonna speak.
Okay.
Because I've watched your progression in your own personal ideology path. It's because I teach about ideologies. What is ideology?
Set of beliefs that kind of shape your perception of the world.
It is, and so we often now, and today, we are completely convoluting party identification with ideology. They're not the same, and ideology itself is not fluid. I mean, it's not static.
Yeah.
It's fluid. And what was liberal at one point is no longer that liberal. I mean, the idea of, like I was saying in Chehalis, teaching about same-sex marriage and marijuana in the 90s. No, there were only 35% of Americans supported that. Now it's 65-70% support both of those things. And so ideology itself, unfortunately, has been hijacked, I think, by political parties. And
Labeled, canned.
And that's happened throughout history. Yeah. Labeled, canned, regurgitated, and so our ideologies are a product of people. There's a great book. You ever heard of an author named George Lakoff? He's a linguist, and he teaches cognitive science at UC Berkeley. And he wrote a book called "Don't Think of an Elephant." I highly recommend it. And it has nothing to do with Republicans. He does this exercise with his students. What cognitive science 101 on day one. All right, and he gets his whole lecture hall and he says, look, now we're gonna go through this exercise. No matter what I do or what I say, promise me you will not think of an elephant. If I talk about a large animal, and obviously you see what happens. And so he gets into framing and the use of language. And this is where our subjects absolutely cross over, in that language is power. If you want to be an effective lawyer, study rhetoric, study language. Effective policy writer, study language, study rhetoric. And so ideology is so much a product of us. One of the first things you're going to do in our gov class or civics is when we take on public opinion is political socialization factors. Okay? Socialization is obviously the factors that have shaped you. Political socialization, to this point in your life, what are the key factors that have shaped you? Where you grew up, your parents, your religion, your parents' jobs, events that have shaped you. And so ideology is a product of our experiences and who we are and who we happen to be at a certain moment in time. And then it just builds and it grows and then it changes. And unfortunately, people are out there deliberately trying to manipulate and shape those factors and for power. It comes back to that word. And so that's kind of where we are. So that's my take on it.
And on my finishing thought, because you're right, I do have a response, because as you know, my ideologies, very fluid, have changed from when I was growing up in a very political household.
Mine too.
And I have gone through a number of the political changes from party to party to party to party. Mr. Schaefer has often helped me identify what I am, politically speaking. But I go back to the book that I will use as the example of the great turn for me was Atlas Shrugged, which was, when I read it in the mid to late 90s, it was one of my favorite books. I fell in love with it. I thought, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever. Then a decade later, I researching, looking, studying, reading, doing other things, and I look back at it now and I think of Atlas Shrugged as almost like a childishly simplistic book that's gone from one extreme to the other, reflecting my own changes.
And that's the role ideology plays in our politics. And it's unfortunately, it's becoming way too synonymous with party identification. There are conservative Democrats. Joe Manchin, good example. There are, the liberal Republicans, I think that right now, the state of the Republican Party isn't where you're gonna find them, mostly libertarians. But there've been plenty of times in history where you've seen liberal Republicans. It's so.
Well, you've seen politicians actually work together.
Yes. And that used to be the goal.
Yeah.
And you look at the impeachment of Nixon. He would have been impeached. He resigned on the eve of his impeachment, and he would have been convicted almost unanimously. It was more about integrity than it was about power. And now the parties have become so powerful themselves, and so tied to moneyed interests. And I don't just say corporate, interest groups as well, unions, so forth. Moneyed interests are driving a lot of this, and then they're trying to manipulate through perception and through messaging, trying to affect our socialization, trying to drive us ideologically.
Now, why don't you add it? So from Nixon, the 60s about, to today, how has money and, let's say, maybe loss of political integrity changed? Like, how has the metrics changed?
Well, there's a lot more of it now, for one. Our economy took off.
Citizens United.
And then Citizens United is the big one in terms of politics. I mean, you can look at that data and look what's happened over the last 12 years. It's combined with social media, those two factors together, and it's led to, we the people are losing our government. It's becoming we, the moneyed interests, that are having a lot more say, because there's multiple political theories. There's the pluralist theory, which our founders wanted, competing interests compromised. Then there's the hyper-pluralist theory, which we see today, where nothing gets done because there's so many issues you can't have a consensus and majority. And then there's elite and class theory, and we're seeing that they're all at play at the same time, but that now is rising in its dominance of our system, to where it's so expensive to run a campaign. It's so expensive that our elected officials are needing to raise that money to get elected. And so, when you've got, again, I'm probably gonna get political here, but when you've got 89% of Americans, according to a recent Gallup poll, who all want, and 79% of Republicans who support universal background checks on gun purchases, and nearly 60% who support banning certain types of weapons like AR-15s, and nothing gets done, it tells you a lot about factions and the power of factions and moneyed interests.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Right.
and I probably should too. My daughter's been waiting for a while, so.
All right.
We didn't even get to the personal question.
No.
did we?
That's like two more. I wanted to do one on war and revolution. So basically, one of the main factors of that one.
Oh boy.
And then decadence.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, you saved my subject for last.
You
so
want to,
know that.
well, I did this again with you.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I do it again. I'm
One
a
day,
little less historically, constitution-wise, it's a little out of my ballpark, but decadence.
No,
Shoot.
no,
just
but
let
this
me-
was
just
good. You
wind
didn't-
me up and I'll go.
You didn't just get a civics teacher's approach, and this was
No,
good.
and yeah,
This was
talk
good.
about language and everything else. I like it. Actually, this is what I kinda like to do. I'm sorry I have to leave.
Oh,
It's
fine.
just, it's busy
You should have
time.
put a couple of ferns out here.
Have you watched the bloopers?
No.
You should watch the bloopers.
Between two
Are you
ferns?
Yeah, are you familiar
I have
with
a
this?
tad bit, yeah. My dad watches things and I kind of come
Okay.
down.
The bloopers for that show are so,
Yeah.
so funny.
So,
Hey, thank you.
I don't think we said anything that we should be worried about in
Yeah.
terms of,
Let's see. No,
I can give you guys the recording afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll stand by anything I think I said, so.
Yeah, and
Sounds good.
I would